So, welcome back to Book Talk with Jordan and Stefan, and we are thrilled to bring you this episode because this is one that we have been very excited about. We were both very big fans of Scythe by Neal Shusterman, and that was covered on a previous episode of Book Talk. And we are now pleased to dive into the second book in the series, what promises to be a trilogy of novels. This is the second book in the series, and it is called Thunderhead. We have been excited about this one because we were excited about Scythe, and this is a sequel that does not disappoint. I mean, it takes everything that was great about the original and just cranks it up to 11 and adds some new ideas. I have to tell you two things before we really get started. The first one is, Stefan and I talked about it, and we decided that this will be a spoiler-heavy review. We are not going to worry about giving anything away, so you have been warned. And if you haven't read the book, if you have not read any of the Scythe books, first of all, we're not going to spend a lot of time recapping the last one. We recommend you read the first Scythe book. We recommend you read this Scythe book, Thunderhead. We recommend both of these, so read them both now and come back to this review after that if you haven't, because there's so much here that we need to talk about, and it's hard to talk about without giving some things away. So that's the other thing. I don't want Book Talk to be like a controversial show or anything, but I have to share this ridiculous comment that we got on the Scythe, the video for our coverage of the first Scythe book. And I want to make it very clear, this person wrote to us using what I assume is their actual name. Do not bother this person, do not harass them, do not pester them in any way, shape, or form. I'm just reading this to make a point. And I hate saying that because, if you say that, then you sound like you actually do have rabid dogs you can unleash on people. I don't. I'm just saying we're not trying to stir up controversy. I just want to make a point here. This woman writes to us in the comments for Scythe. She says, "How low will the Marxist public school system go? A public school in the state of Ohio has this book on their approved reading list for 8th graders age range of 13 years old. They are assigning this book for advanced ELA, I think English Language Arts, 13-year-old students to read and go over in depth for 6 weeks. Are you kidding me? This book, by the publisher's own admission, promotes teenagers being taught to become killers, master of the art of killing for a population control agenda. Be warned, this UN Agenda 21 pro-murder, justifying murder in the name of the greater good, may also be on your child's middle school required reading list. This madness must stop." And then she quotes a bunch of the jacket copy to apparently support her point. And so I responded this way: proving that even something as innocuous as Book Talk can provoke unbridled hostility, Miss Laurie Anderson, no relation to the influential performance artist of the same name, here beats the favorite dead horse of concerned mothers everywhere, the classic, "Oh no, the childrens will see the violence and turn into psycho killers" riff. Look, lady, there are 360 million people in this country, and all the serial killers and spree shooters in the nation's history combined do not equal a vanishing fraction of 1% of the current living population, to say nothing of our entire 200-plus year history. In other words, if reading, seeing, hearing about violence had any potential to turn otherwise healthy, well-adjusted kids into killers, then we would expect to see it on a grand scale, not the incidental occurrences that happen. If you had bothered to read the book rather than drawing your own conclusions based solely on the jacket copy, then you would have found that it's actually a celebration of life and how death impacts those we leave behind, with many sensitive and subtle messages about love, compassion, and kindness. But just like Battle Royale, I mean the Hunger Games before it, you thought, "This is a book about children's killing," and sprang to your keyboard to defend their fragile, unwashed brains from the heathen hysteria.
Yeah, it's like sort of making a big stink about 1984, poisoning people's minds. The whole point was
Yeah,
that it's a dystopia. It's supposed to show
right.
the horrors of a
Yeah,
potential future, and this is actually a
yeah,
combination of both. This shows the horrors as well as some of the good things in a potential future. So, you know what? If these people just read the darn book, we wouldn't have to have
yeah.
this sort of comment happening all the time.
Well, it's a lot harder to, I mean, it's a
Yeah,
lot harder to sit down and read the damn
yeah,
book. And the other thing is, we have to assume that anyone reading the book is even going to understand it, because this person comes into immediately that it's like it's part of the Marxist public education
right.
system. If you go into it with that mindset, where you're probably going through the book with a highlighter, highlighting everything that you think is Marxist programming or something, you're not going to get anything out of it. And
Well, they did say that it was geared towards teenagers. I'd say it is a teenager reading level. It's not difficult to read,
no,
and I think it's great for teenagers. This would be a great book
yeah,
for kids. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, it's like I was tempted to say right there as I was reading that, I was tempted to preface that with a comment about like, please understand we are both sympathetic to the recent shooting that happened, and we don't wish to seem insensitive to that or whatever. And you know what? No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say that, because you know what? I'm not going to go into this from a standpoint of apologizing. This book needs to be appreciated in and of itself. It is not a handbook on how to become a child murderer or a spree shooter or something like that. That is patently absurd. And it is actually it really what this book is. It's about a lot of things, but when it comes to death and killing, this book is about what it means, one, to be at the end of your life. How do you want your life to end? What's the most meaningful way there? And also, what is the what is the responsibility of the people who are tasked with ending life, executions and mercy killings and all of that, things like that? These are the questions that are being raised. And the thing is, grade 8, okay, so that's like 13, 14, maybe 15, that age range right there. In about 5 years, those kids are going to be unleashed on the world, and they will have to confront those issues in reality at some point. We do them a disservice if we, wipe their bottoms and sanitize the world for them until the day they turn 18, and then suddenly they can be executed. They can be drafted into the army. They can, smoke cigarettes and have unprotected. All of this, all of the responsibilities of being an adult suddenly thrust on them after a lifetime of helicopter parenting. I mean, it's just madness. It has got to stop. Yeah,
I would see it as less controversial than, let's say, the Chrysalids. If you were to read that as a kid, I mean that has
yeah,
some themes in there that are pretty broad.
hmm
But this is, I mean, just in terms of reading, in terms of time, in terms of conversation.
yeah,
If this was a book report, this would be perfect. This would be perfect for
yeah.
someone to read. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's perfect. It's what it really is. It's a perfect book for kids to read and sit down and talk about. You know, and the thing that always irks me, and we'll get off. My cats are fighting. We'll get off. I'll say this, and we'll get off the subject. But the thing that always irks me is, I promise you, this Laurie Anderson woman or whoever, 99% of the time, whoever raises these bullshit canards about, you know, kids are going to, read this and go kill everybody and all of that. One, I mean, first of all, I'm sorry, but first of all, how does that even? Why would that be part of the Marxist school agenda, ensuring that there's more spree killers? I don't get that. Anyway, the other thing, I promise you, Laurie Anderson and a lot of these quote-unquote concerned mothers, they have absolutely no problem with their kids picking up a copy of the Bible, the Christian Bible, and reading it. And I'm not saying there's not benefits to reading the Christian Bible, but my God, the Old Testament, if you like torture porn, where we're talking about, the book that's supposedly pro-life tells you the right circumstances under which you ought to reach into a woman's vagina and perform an abortion by hand. I mean, if your kid's smart off to you, you have them stoned to death. I mean, it's like abject insanity, and that's always universally okay. Everybody's going to read that and process it okay. Never mind the woman that cut off her child's arms because she thought God was telling her to.
Well,
Yeah.
There are books out there to read that are about communism or communal living or communal life that I don't even think I would give to a young adult. Maybe an adult in university to study.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But even then, those are just like stuff by like Aldous Huxley, The Island. That's a big political book. So yeah, you could say, yeah, this is probably not a good book, but it's also not a good book in general, not because of its ideas, but because of it as a book, as a novel. It's just not a good read. So if you want to study books about communism that are not about killing, but about the idea of it, that would be a politically guided book, which is about politics. So that's why you read it, as opposed to, this has a futuristic potential world where population is out of control, and thus we have to have a system in place to curb that. I mean, that's a pretty nasty concept, but it's a great story, at least in this version of it.
Yeah. And absolutely, and that's basically, and I'm gonna let Stefan carry this for a minute because I've been yakking, but the simple setup for the world of Scythe, of the Scythedom, if you will, the simple setup for this world is that this is a future, maybe I guess a few centuries. I forget the exact date because they've stopped keeping track of calendar years in the book, but we assume it's a few centuries in the future. And they have scientifically perfected the method for continuing life exponentially, eternally. You can essentially biologically now live eternally. And in this book, the way you do it is when you get too old, you just have your age set back, so you go from being 85 to 25 or something like that. To deal with the population influx, or the population boom, because nobody's dying, they have to have people who are specially trained to go out and cull the herd, and these are the Scythes. These are the people who are trained to kill at random. They can't have malice aforethought. They've got to basically recreate the potential for death that would have existed in the mortal age to keep the population under control. And the way the system works is if the Scythe chooses you and you go willingly, then that Scythe will grant 1 year of immunity to everybody in your immediate family, and maybe your friends too if they're feeling generous. If you do resist, however, that Scythe is then obliged to go brutally murder everybody in your immediate family as well, and nobody gets immunity. And so that is a really chilling setup. And the book series follows two principal characters, Citra and Ronan, who are first apprentice Scythes, and then now in this book, Citra has become Scythe Anastasia. She is a fully ordained Scythe, and Rowan is this vigilante that's going out and killing corrupt Scythes. That's the setup. Stefan, give us your thoughts overall.
Yeah, that's how it starts, and overall there's a lot of threads in here to follow. There's about 5 or 6 happening at once at sometimes. And it's still the same classic writing we expect from Shusterman. He's very quick, he's very clean. There's no fat. And in the second novel, I was hoping there would be some fat because I want to know some more about the world. Yeah. And eventually we do get that, but it's in his same style. So as opposed to reading a fantasy novel where you spend a chapter or two just talking about one character or one setting, here it's just boom, you're just going. Every thread pops up and it leads to another, and they end up becoming subplots. So this is how you do it. This is how you connect all these multiple threads into the main plot, and it just works so well. And the chapters are beautiful. The chapters, it's like going to a restaurant and having like 20 little meals.
Yeah.
And you're just like, wow, that was great. Wow, that was great. Oh, reminds me of the previous one. It's slightly different. It's such a wonderful experience that you can just, I want to read another page. I want to read another chapter. I want to read another 2 chapters. And then you don't know what time it is in the middle of the morning because you've been reading so long. So it was just a great read. This is a fantastic story. It is easy to pick up, hard to put down, and you just want to know what happens to these characters at the end. Because the plot lines do end up building up, and you're like, okay, what's going on? And then, oh, yeah, this guy, I can't remember what happened to him. So, yeah, I'd say maybe 1 or 2 plot threads just sort of get cold while the rest keep going on and on together.
Yeah. That, I much agree much the same way. What's funny, now you talk about great cliffhangers. This was my experience, and I finished reading the book yesterday. Yesterday being at the time that we recorded this, because we actually record these in advance of releasing of the month that they're released. But anyway, I finished reading this book yesterday, and I got the Barnes & Noble edition, which has a special exclusive kind of appendix from the author where he gives his notes on and observations on the different chapters, on all the chapters. He has notes. It's like director's commentary in a movie almost. And so what was funny is I was reading and reading and reading, and I thought I had like another 20 some odd pages to go, and then the book was instantly over, and I was like, oh my God. And it just stops. Like it was it's just a feeling of hitting a wall, man. I mean, you are so into this up to the very last minute. And the thing is, in this book, you're right about the plot threads, that there was one plot thread in particular that I didn't care for, and that was the plot thread where Scythe Faraday is going and researching about what they call the Land of Nod, which is this hidden world that was created when the Scythedom was established, and he's trying to find it. And that plot thread was very weak to me, just because it felt like Da Vinci Code logic, where it's like, I wonder what piece of information we need. I bet it's this piece of information. I wonder what book it's in. Hey, maybe it's in that book. Hey, it is. I wonder where we need to go now. Maybe it's over here. Hey, that is where we need to go. Maybe there's a book here we need. Hey, there is. It's like just instant gratification of, I need the next clue in my little trek to find this place, and it's always exactly where I want it to be. That part of it was weak to me.
The worst part of that's exactly right, because right at the end of that thread, it's like, uh-oh, we've been found out, and you're like, how the hell did you get found out in the middle of a basement of a place where these cameras don't exist? Yeah. And it's like, what? So is the Thunderhead lying to us that he does actually have cameras everywhere, even though he says he doesn't? And for that to happen was like, oh, come on. That was like really...
That's too easy, man.
It was a big cop-out, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like... That was the other thing, too, is the Michael Faraday character. And by the way, the sites they all choose the names of famous people from history to be their new identity. I don't know that there's any symbolic meaning per se in a lot of these names, because I don't like the villain is Robert Goddard. I don't see how the actual Goddard would be a villain. But okay, Scythe Michael Faraday. This is what was weak about that line to me. He goes to this museum. See, one of the Thunderhead's ideas was to recreate the Museum of Alexandria. And then that museum is then taken over by the Scythedom to house all of the journals that the Scythes keep about the people they kill. And the Scythes are required to keep little journals, little mini biographies of the people that they kill as part of the respect for the dead and everything. And so Faraday walks to begin his inquest, his journey to find the Land of Nod. He begins by going to the Library of Alexandria and just walking right in. Now, he faked his own death in the first book, and this is why, like I said, no spoilers will be spared, but he faked his own death in the first book. And he walks into the library at Alexandria in plain clothes. He's not wearing his robe. He's just wearing street clothes. And so because of that, he goes unnoticed. And I'm like, unnoticed except by one person who eventually becomes his confidant and everything. And I'm like, wait a minute. One of the most revered and respected Scythes in the world walks into a hub of Scythe activity and nobody noticed, that surely there's going to be, surely they're going to have like some kind, not the Thunderhead, but like security functions that'll scan everybody that walks in or something, that kind of thing. Because, I mean, if you're, they're going to want to know who's coming into this building, and he just walks. That's the thing, and I don't want to harp on this too much because, again, I reiterate, this is a phenomenal book. It was just this one plot thread just felt a little too clunky and a little too ill thought out for me. The rest of them, stellar.
Yeah, this is the problem with the lack of detail that I want. Like, there's lots of little things like, what if this were to happen and why doesn't it? Because there's all these cameras everywhere. There's all these people around. There's all these things to happen. And that actually is about one of the main characters who the Thunderhead pretty much anoints to go help solve a problem. So it's like, okay, this information is all out there. It's all around. Everyone has access to it. It's all in the cloud or whatever you call the network. And someone must have noticed something. Like, this is not some impossible occurrence. Now, what was interesting was about near the end where they have this one island that is external to the Thunderhead. And it's run by just everyone else. So it's like, okay, cool. There would be problems. Obviously, it's not perfect. Okay, we get that. But wouldn't there be like another AI, just not the Thunderhead, just running the thing? Like, why not? Why wouldn't you have like a dumb Thunderhead, which was just magnitude
just
lower?
In charge of that island?
Like, just do that.
Well, you know what it is. Part of it, I think part of that is necessary for the kind of the moral of the story, the message of the story, which is in a lot of Shusterman's writing, and I say this because I've read Unwind as well. A lot of Shusterman's writing, dystopian fiction is his thing. And his recurring theme, it seems to be, is that he likes to create a world where people have become so dependent on the technology that the minute they don't have it, they're fucked over, and that they've lost their humanity in a way that now threatens their survival if they don't have the technology. For example, in the book Unwind is a book about organ harvesting. And so in the hospitals, what they do is unwanted children at the age of 12 can be unwound, which means their organs can be harvested and transplanted to people that need them. And so in that book, there's a character that needs has a heart attack and needs a heart transplant to survive, or open heart surgery rather. But they don't know how to do open heart surgery. They don't know how to, strip the arteries out of the leg and transplant them up here and all of that, because the only thing the hospitals know how to do is grab a heart from the freezer and put it in you. So it's that kind of thing. It's like the nanosecond we don't have this technology that we're completely dependent on, the whole world is fucked, and that's, I think, what's happening there. The Scythedom, which is the overall organization of Scythe. These people are victims of their own hubris. They are victims of their own unrestrained malice and greed and avarice and all of that. And so it's not just that they see themselves as not needing the Thunderhead. They see themselves as being above and beyond the Thunderhead in a lot of ways. And, the big theme that we're wrestling with in the Scythedom is there are the old Scythes, the traditional Scythes, who believe that when you kill somebody, that is a grave responsibility, no pun intended. That's a grave responsibility, and it's a very solemn act, and you do it with the most profound amount of respect and remorse. You convey to the people how remorseful you are that you have to do this, that you are doing this with no ill will towards them. You are kind and compassionate to their families, the people they leave behind. You feel tremendous regret for everything that you do. That's the old guard. And then the new guard of Scythes are the ones that are like, their attitude is, you know what? We control life and death in this world. We are superior to you. We get a little boner from killing everybody. We love just slaughtering people left and right, and there's nothing they can do about it. And let's have a big just big blood orgy, and they are the new guard of the Scythedom, and it's very easy to infer that this might be a commentary on the Catholic Church. I'm just saying, but or organized religion in general. But that's the divide that's happening. And the Scythedom, when they're on Enduro, which is the island at the end, and which, you talk about lack of description at times. I just imagined Enduro as looking like the intro. If you remember the camera panning intro of Logan's Run, that's just what I assumed it looks like. I'm a sci-fi geek, so everything kind of looks like Logan's Run in my head 24 hours a day. But when I saw the White House in person, I was surprised that it wasn't covered with vines. But anyway, the point being, though, the Scythe, their avarice and their hubris makes them think that they don't need the Thunderhead, they don't need the technology, they are above that. And what happens is, it's like, well, you're not above. You are not morally superior to your machines breaking down and to plumbing problems and to tectonic plates shifting and all the things that ultimately cause Enduro to sink. You're not above that. You're not above the nature of reality. And so it's this kind of big wake-up call to the Scythedom that, look, I think they wipe out like hundreds of thousands of people or something. When that happens, all these Scythes are dead and everything, and it's like, it's saying, look, you're not above. You administer death to other human beings, but that does not put you above reality. Reality is still very much in control of you. And so I think that's what's happening, because you're right. I mean, logically speaking, yeah, they would have like fail-safe mechanisms in place. But you know what? There's a great symbol that's mentioned just very briefly on that island, and that is when Xenocrates, the High Blade of Mid-America, as they call it, Xenocrates looks out from his hotel room and he sees a Scythe that is trying to ride a jet ski, and he takes off on the jet ski, but he's not bothered to take his robes off. So when he hits the wind, the robes are caught by the wind, and he goes sailing in the opposite direction through the air, just flying through the air in his robes. And it's like, that is such a perfect little metaphor for the mindset of that's led to the corruption of these people, where it's like, this guy, he wants to go have fun on the jet ski, never stops to think about what his Scythe robes, literally and metaphorically, are doing to him and his judgment and all that. That's what's happening. So I think in modern day times, if this island were to exist, yeah, it would have fail-safes in place and a computer network all its own that could take care of it. In this world, no. They're so far beyond having to worry about things like that they don't even think about it anymore. So.
Yeah, I imagine Xenocrates to be like a really, really bored neural wolf who didn't want to do anything. Like he had the brain for it, he had the fat for it, and he had like all the power, and he didn't really do anything with it. It's like, dude, you could just like investigate stuff. You can go figure stuff out. You can go solve things. It's like,
Yeah, well, that's part of it. It's like he reflects in this book. He reflects on how it's like, well, God, I've really done all I can in this life. I have one of the highest offices in the world, and if I succeed in becoming the supreme High Blade, I'll just be a little bit higher up the totem pole than I am now. So, what the fuck am I doing here? He has kind of that moment. By the way, I have my mental image of him is Jerry from The Office. I mean, not from The Office, from Parks and Rec. So, classic Jerry. And he is almost kind of that character in a way. But the main plot threads in this were so cool. And I love how Neal Shusterman is not afraid to freak you out, whatever your age is. Neal Shusterman's not afraid to freak you out. And when we finally find out what's going on with Tiger, Ronan's friend, and he's been, that the real reason he's being trained to become a Scythe is because they're going to cut off his head and transplant Goddard's head onto his, and the way it was handled, when they immediately when he said, the door opened and a wheelchair is pushed through, I thought, oh shit, I know where this is going. And that just chills up my spine, man. I love that in my mid-30s, I love reading something that freaks me out, just like I'm 11 or 12 years old again, reading like Stephen King for the first time, or Harlan Ellison in my case. And, I just love that. I love being something that gets under my skin like that. And Shusterman knows how to do it. I mean, I read the first Unwind book, I think in like 2013, and it's only been now in 2018 that I've even entertained the idea of reading the second one. It's that chilling. And this book, this book series continues that idea, but I think the main thrust of this book is told largely from the point of view of the Thunderhead, which, to clarify, the Thunderhead is the sentient supercomputer that runs the entire runs the human race, runs the Earth, all of that. And we get these journal entries in every chapter. We get journal entries from the Thunderhead, where it's contemplating the nature of its own existence. And there is one point where he says something to the effect of, "I have no mouth and I must scream." It's an obvious reference to Harlan Ellison.
I saw that too.
Yeah, and then at the end he actually does scream. He screams by activating every piece of technology, the alarm systems of every piece of technology on the planet, which felt like kind of a reference to the Lawnmower Man in my mind. But the Thunderhead, this is what I love, is the Thunderhead is in the process of realizing it knows already that it is a man-made god. It knows that. It's all-powerful, all-knowing, and all of this, and omnipotent and omnipresent, and all of these things. And the only reason it doesn't interfere with the Scythedom is it says it chooses not to interfere with the Scythedom because that's the only way that it can be benevolent, is to leave death in the hands of human beings, and then it can be totally benevolent, and instead of just being a benevolent dictator. And so, and that right there is a great metaphor for God, and the idea of why does God allow, why would a loving God allow horrible things to happen and all of that. But what the Thunderhead is realizing throughout this book, as it observes what's happening, it is realizing that it not only is it a man-made God, it may actually be God, like literally God. And that's what's fascinating. And there are so many theological arguments in here and spiritual arguments. C.S. Lewis would probably kill to write a book that's got this much theological and religious symbolism in it. I mean, if you thought the Chronicles of Narnia was a great allegory for Christian theology, this book blows it into orbit,
Well, the one thing I did like from this book, which we got, were some descriptions or details about the nature of living and lifestyle in this futuristic world. And one was the description and lifestyle of the unsavory people, who are those who are effectively criminals, but because there is really no crime in the future, they are treated as unsavories, which means they are no longer connected or allowed to have communal relations with the Thunderhead anymore. So they go around in these, I guess they're called unsavory sections, where they can just experience all this violence and behavior, which is really not nice. But when you're a bunch of immortals running around, getting reborn every other day because you got bored and fell out of a plane or something, it's no big deal. So that's what the Thunderhead said. Okay, well, I have to create these groups of people, or designate them as these groups of people, who can then live out their fantasies, being rebels or being whatever they want. So one of them, I thought this was an entire chapter on comedy, where the first time the main character, or one of the main characters, Grayson, goes into this 60s diner setting, and it's just a bunch of people swearing and beating each other up and ordering milkshakes and eating each other's food, and it's just like, is this a joke? Like, this is one giant facade. It's just this hilarious Like I was imagining this was just if this was a movie, this would be the joke, the silly part of the movie, and then it's actually taken for being serious. This is how people in this world are acting, and Grayson realizes he has to actually become one of these characters for the sake of his job. And it's interesting how it wasn't really well explained how his persona was removed, and this new one he created was then put on record. And you're like, yeah, how did that happen? Aside from learning that his agent that was helping him out is gone now, and now he has no contact with the Thunderhead, so now he's going blind. And you're like, okay, where is this going?
Well, that's what, the Thunderhead keeps clarifying in its little narratives. It doesn't give it away, but it says, I can't predict the future per se, but I can predict it to a certain probability, like a 98% probability. And so what the Thunderhead can do, it can't interfere, but what it can do is kind of shift everything in the right direction. And this is what I like about the Thunderhead. I love stories where you've got a set of rules that seem ironclad, they seem foolproof, and then the whole story is built around finding all of the holes in those rules. Isaac Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics is a great example of that. Death Note, with all of the rules about the Death Note and everything, is another great example of that. And this here is another great example of, like, the Thunderhead is what the Thunderhead's ongoing philosophical quandary is: how do I move the human race in the right direction without becoming a dictator, without forcing it on them? And what it ultimately does, and this is again why we're telling you to, if you haven't read the book, read it first. What it ultimately does is it realizes, well, I'm going to make everybody in the human race an unsavory, except for Grayson Tolliver. I'm going to clear his name. And it's obvious what's happening here. The last line of the book is, hello, Grayson, we need to talk. And it's the Thunderhead talking to him. And so obviously what's being set up is Grayson is being set up to be the Thunderhead's representative on Earth. Grayson is becoming Jesus Christ. It's a very obvious metaphor at that point. But that, again, is the idea of, like, if you're talking about God, how does God push people or move the human race in the right direction without interfering? Well, part of it is, by becoming unsavory, everybody's essentially accepting original sin. They're all sinners now. Everybody's fallen short of the glory of God. And so it's this thing of, like, I'm going to have to create this go-between between myself and the human race if we're going to be guided. They're going to be guided properly. That is actually alluded to in the early chapters of the book, because towards the beginning of the book, Xenocrates, the High Blade of Mid-America, has to get information from the Thunderhead. Now, the Thunderhead cannot communicate with the Scythedom. That's against the rules. So what happens is they have repurposed the confessional at a Catholic church, at a long since abandoned Catholic church. They've repurposed the confessional so that Xenocrates sits in one booth, a person who represents the Thunderhead sits in the booth 2 booths over in the confessional, and then another intermediary sits in the booth between the two of them, where the priest would normally sit, and that person serves as the intermediary, so that if a discussion of the Thunderhead's intentions or policies or whatever needs to happen, it happens through 2 intermediaries, so that the Scythedom can never be said to actually be interacting with the Thunderhead. And that is another thing of, like, creating this. We're going to create this person that's the between God and man, and that is it's so strict that Xenocrates says, please tell the representative that it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to a successful meeting, or something like that. And the person passes on the information and then turns back and says, the Thunderhead's representative feels that acknowledging a shared positive feeling or something would be engendering a relationship and therefore cannot communicate on that matter. It's literally that strict. And that's the big crux of the story. And that was what was so satisfying to me, because the Grayson thread feels like it almost feels like Requiem for a Dream or something, where it's just this guy going down, 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 down in his life, and everything he's worked so hard for is being stripped away from him, and it's the big, Lord, why have you forsaken me kind of thing.
Exactly.
And he hits rock bottom, and of course he ends up in a church, and he gives himself to the Tonists, who are the last active religion in the human race. I keep wanting to say tonists or tonists. I guess it's tonists, but because that's musical tones. But he gives himself to that. He gives himself over to that at his absolute lowest point, and he is then redeemed. And now he is exalted. He's going to be exalted to be the Thunderhead's representative. He is the Messiah and all of that. So that was a great resolution to that, because that, as much as I enjoyed the Grayson Tolliver character and as fascinated as I was by him, his threads were hard to read, because it felt like it was just an eternal downhill. I didn't feel like, until the very end, and it all made sense, I didn't feel like we were doing anything with this guy except beating him up.
Yeah.
And so and that's again, it's Job in the Old Testament. It's all there. And it's this great symbolism there. The two main characters, Citra and Ronan, their plot threads, of course, their plot threads are the main thing we're interested in, and they're what's moving the story. And those are both compelling. I love that. Now I have to. You'll forgive me. I know being that this is a young adult novel, I have to ask one question, and I have to swear. I'm sorry. I can only swear to ask this question, but this scene ends, or their thread ends on a cliffhanger in the book, with them locked inside a part of the museum that's about to collapse underwater, which will freeze them and render them where they can be revived if they're ever found. And that's their best chance of surviving. And it has, as they're waiting for the temperature in the chamber to freeze them, it says this: when he took her in his arms, it suddenly didn't seem to matter what was going on outside of their tiny, sealed universe. In the terminal minutes of their current lives, it was just the two of them finally giving in to their ultimate act of completion. The binary at last becoming one. Okay, that's beautiful, but I have to know, does that mean they fucked?
Well, halfway through the book, I honestly thought that the narrator was the Thunderhead, because how else would this information become available aside from having a universal third-person omniscient perspective? And then, of course, as we know, whenever a character gets introduced, they have a journal entry like they did in the last book. And that happened with Goddard as well. All of a sudden, the guy at the end of the chapter reading a journal was Goddard as opposed to the Thunderhead. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is how this is done. So descriptions like that, I mean, this is why it's okay for young adults. There's not this glorification and detail. It's just not his style of writing, really, to describe things that are gory or sexual or whatever. It just sort of goes into just the essential of what you need to know. It's the same with this, at the start of the story, where there's a fight scene, and it's pretty visceral, but it's not like gory. It's not decapitations and descriptions of the blood and all the So it's supposed to be simplistic, and acts like that. I mean, even the whole idea of Curie just saving those two. Like, how about bringing more people with you? What does it matter? Like, if it's a big room, and it's so well preserved, who cares? Bring as many people as you can.
I think part of that is because Curie has to make a moral decision there. She has to, as she said, it would become her responsibility to track down Rowan and bring him to justice if she became Mid-American High Blade, which she does. And so when the thing is, she is confronting, do I do the policy, do I do right by the policies of the Scythedom, or do I do right by Citra and Ronan because I know in my heart what Ronan is doing is the right thing? And so by putting them in this kind of time capsule where they're going to be frozen until they're thawed out, what she's doing in a way is abdicating that responsibility, which is really the moral high ground there, because now she goes and she dies. And supposedly, we don't, it's possible to bring people back, so maybe she'll come back. But she goes and dies, and then at that point, she has done right by Citra and Ronan as best she can while still maintaining the responsibilities of the office. And I think that's very profound. And one thing I want to add, by the way, I mentioned that I have the version I have has the author commentaries for each chapter. Here's what Shusterman says about that chapter. I wept over the death of Scythe Curie. I didn't want her to die, but sometimes your story calls for a character to be sacrificed, and you must answer the call. She would have to die so that Ronan and Citra could live, but she dies with such honor it's almost okay. As for Rowan and Citra, the reference to the opera Aida earlier in the story is intentional. Those two star-crossed lovers were entombed under the sands of Egypt together. Now Rowan and Citra face the same fate. Rowan, however, has the perspective to realize that in their case, to end their lives in this particular way is the best chance for their survival. Water will not get in, and the coldness of the vault will preserve their bodies. Someday they will be revived. So in other words, in case you haven't guessed, we haven't seen the end of Rowan and Citra. How could I do that to you? I think my favorite moment in the entire book is the moment when, as they're sinking to the bottom of the sea alone in the vault, Rowan and Citra finally surrender to each other. Although I don't say it explicitly, I think we all know what they're doing as they sink to the bottom of the sea. I think it's the most powerfully charged romantic moment I've ever written. So yeah, I mean, he's basically saying, yes, they consummated it. They got it on. But one of the frustrations I have with a lot of young adult writers is they're afraid to it's like you have to set up the very best possible circumstances for sex before you can even suggest that it's happening. It's like, John Green can explore teen sexuality in his book because one of the characters is dying of cancer. It's like it's like you set up this extenuating circumstance and it becomes okay. And it's things like that. But, and granted, he is writing for a young adult audience. There is this impetus to keep everything kind of PG-13, which there is actually, at points, some very graphic violence in this book that would. And they're trying to, they say they're making a movie out of it. You're probably going to have an R rating to depict some of these scenes. I don't see how you could do it otherwise. But like when Goddard goes out into the, storms out of the main hall and just goes on just, offing people left and right out of pure, spite and throwing a hissy fit and everything. Like, that's going to be pretty damn bloody. But anyway, that, all of that said, I mean, all of these threads, these plot threads, were just handled so well, and you could get an entire book out of any one of them. That's what's great.
Yeah, and this is why it's short enough to still be a novella, and it could have worked as a novel because of his writing style. Mm-hmm. He can make at least two more. If this is a trilogy, then yeah, he could tighten it up and just do what he has in mind. But part of this, I felt it wasn't really the story about the Thunderhead. The Thunderhead's there, mm-hmm. but it wasn't really about exploring what does it mean to be this curator or this caretaker of the world. It was mm-hmm. more or less about the people in it trying to figure out how to solve their problems. So I was hoping that we would see more about the Thunderhead in the next story. Mm-hmm. And this was just the bridge to that, where we get to see the setup for that, because this was just the Thunderhead talking off to the side most of the time. Yeah. which is fine.
Right.
Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You could. That's the style he set up in the first one. It's a totally cool technique to have a little interlude after everything you did or everything you read. And because it wasn't Thunderhead, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, he's sharing his own journal. He's sharing, I don't know. What is this? The back brain? What would we call these journal entries by the Thunderhead?
Right. Well, that's the thing, is I think that's part of it. Like, the Thunderhead is keeping this journal, and it's trying to convey these ideas to the human race in such a way that it's not interfering. It's not saying, hey, this is why I did what I did. One of the most interesting ones. Now, there's a couple of interesting observations the Thunderhead makes. One is that Stefan, you were talking. I remember in the first one of these, you were talking about, well, we don't really get a good explanation of why the world is set up this way, why the Thunderhead is choosing to handle the Scythedom this way and everything. And one of the things, or why we have the Scythedom and all of that, and one of the things that's clarified in this book, there's 2 points that are clarified in this book, which is, one, they've tried having people live on other planets. They can't do it because they're so dependent on the Thunderhead that they can't live without it. And 2, population-wise, in about 100 years, they're going to need, right now it says they have something like 12,000 Scythes that are killing 5 people a week, and in 100 years, with the population boom, in 100 years, they're going to need almost 500,000 Scythes killing 100 people a day. And it's going to be insane. He doesn't even stop to consider what the then granting a year of immunity will do to people, or do to the population. But at the end of the book, Citra and Ronan, or Citra, notices all of these rings, all the jewels for the rings, and they say we have enough jewels to make rings for 400,000 Scythes. And she thinks, well, why would they need 400,000 Scythes? So that's the ominous thing that's coming, is this mass slaughter that's going to happen. But the other thing, the other revelation from the Thunderhead that is so interesting to me, is that the Thunderhead realizes that ultimately the only thing that's stopping it from actually being God is that it still exists in linear time. If it can find a way to exist outside linear time, then it will actually be God. And it stops to think, and it stops and asks itself, it says, well, if that's true, if I have the capacity to become God, does that mean that I've been God all along, that I've been God from the very beginning of time and all of this? And that's the foreshadowing there, that I think what we're ultimately getting to is the Thunderhead is literally going to become God. And that's what's happening. And that, I'm someone who, I'm fascinated by mythological stories, and certainly the Old Testament creation story is no different. That, there are always those questions that you get, like, okay, if God is alone, singular, nothing exists but God, why is it that in the Old Testament the first thing God says is, let us make man in our own image? Who is God talking to when he says that? Who is the image that so that's where I think the Thunderhead is, what the Thunderhead is looking towards. And it's the attitude that it adopts towards the human race towards the end of the book does become very much the Yahweh kind of God, the strong, admonishing father figure kind of God. And I think that's why it realizes it needs Grayson to become Jesus, to create the that one, we all know that's what that is. There's no other.
We think so. We think, we're not entirely sure what the Thunderhead has in mind, but the idea was that the Thunderhead is actually holding humanity back from whatever, because it's been, as you said, it's been trying to get to space, and it's tried and failed horribly, which is hilarious, because we can get people to the moon and back in relatively weak old technology. And they can't they could barely put a space station up. They could barely put satellites. It's like, what's going on in this world?
They're so, that's the thing, they're so dependent on the Thunderhead. And it's really, I think it's that, again, the old message of God helps those who help themselves. It's like, look, you can't just rely on God or the Thunderhead to intervene and do everything for you. You really have to take care of yourselves. And so maybe that's the next thing that we're gearing up towards, is the next stage of human evolution, kind of like a 2001 Space Odyssey kind of thing, that what's really going to happen is we're going to become so autonomous that we actually can colonize other planets and take care of ourselves, and that answers the problem of mortality, and the Scythedom, it becomes null and void, and they don't have to go around butchering people anymore. That may be where this is going, which, even if I've just predicted the third book correctly, it's still going to be fascinating. It's still going to be fun. It's still going to be a wild ride. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, the idea of having immortality for, I think it was at least 300 years on this world, that you either put off everything for tomorrow so nothing gets done, or you become so scared that a Scythe is going to come kill you that you try and figure out how the hell to get out of this place.
Yeah.
And there were several parts of the book where like, hey, why don't we just live here? There's no Scythes here. Hey,
right. Well, that was the thing. There was one, was it in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, I think it was, that they mentioned that the Scythes, there are virtually no Scythes in that city because it glorifies, that city has this like 24-hour-a-day Mardi Gras, and so the Scythes find it distasteful, and they don't glean people there. And like, well, I know where I'm living.
Mardi Gras 24/7, yeah.
Yeah, Mardi Gras 24/7, and we're immortal. Okay, I think I know where I'm going. And it's kind of that, things like that. It's kind of like if you've ever seen the College Humor has a series called Dorkly, where they reanimate video games to do little comedy skits. And so they have one for Diablo, where it's Diablo, and it's your main character in the isometric view, and he's talking to the towns, the villagers, and he says, okay, so what you're telling me is there is a portal to hell in the middle of this village that is sucking everybody, all the souls down there, right? And they say, yes, and we need you to help us. We need you to save us. He says, okay, well, everybody roll up your sleeves. We are going to move the whole village 5 miles that way. It's like, yeah, that's kind of the obvious. No, we need you to go down into the bowels of hell for us. But even so, I mean, that there were those things, and granted, the site, that is clarified to some degree, where the Thunderhead is saying, I've set up these certain areas to be lawless because I need to observe, or lawless or free of the constraints of this, that, or the other, because I need to see how people behave under these circumstances. So he explains it a little bit, but but that's again, like I said, I think we could go on talking about this book for hours, and we probably will after the podcast is over. But the main thing to everybody, I think I can speak for both of us, Stefan, when I say this is a great series. It is engaging and thought-provoking from the word go. If you haven't read it, which you shouldn't be listening at this point if you haven't read it, but both of these books, highly recommend them. We are so psyched and so thrilled for the third book whenever that happens to come out. We'll definitely be covering that. So,
yeah, for sure. It's a must read, and it's probably my favorite dystopia series so far.
Yeah, very much so. I agree. All right. Well, for Stefan DiIorio, I'm Jordan Owen. Thank you for tuning in to Book Talk. Be sure to check back with us next month when our book will be My Friend Dahmer by Durf Bachter. Take care.